Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Cecilia was walking to the store in a good mood because she managed to stop her father before he bought any alcohol. He didn't work regularly, but sometimes he took on orders when his head cleared a little. During those times, the yard smelled deliciously of wood, and Cecilia's mother patiently waited for him to finish his work. Ignacio, Cecilia's father, was a skilled woodworker. People in the village said that if Ignacio made a frame, there would be no need to putty the windows because everything fit so well that no wind could pass through. It was precisely this profession that turned her father into a quiet drunkard. He earned good money, and everyone considered it a duty to give him some alcohol for his work. A year after her father started drinking almost every day, her mother also began to drink. At first, it was just for company, but then because of the sorrow for their life together. For some reason, Cecilia felt sorry for her mother, but not as much as for her father. Her mother was always nagging and never said anything affectionate. She nagged at her father and scolded her, but she didn't amount to much herself. She never even worked, although it was not accepted in the village. Cecilia entered the store. "Hello, Adela." The saleswoman was a beautiful, large woman. She smiled. "Hi Cecilia, how are you?" Cecilia didn't have a chance to answer because there were other women in the store, and one of them spoke up. "How can you ask how things are going in that house? Everyone knows already. Cecilia, don't forget about your mother's debt." Cecilia became flustered and blushed, while Adela put her hands on her hips. "What's wrong with you, Nora? Have you completely lost your mind? What does Cecilia have to do with that debt? The girl has already suffered enough. And you're trying to provoke her here. You'll regret what you've said if I do the right witchy thing." Nora realized she had said something out of place and that the child was truly not to blame. She had been unlucky with her parents. She struggled with them but still managed to study well. Nora tried to make peace and said, "Don't get angry, I blurted out without thinking. You know it wasn't out of malice. And Cecilia, don't listen to me. Something is off with me today." Cecilia tried to smile, but it didn't quite work, and Nora hurried to leave the store so as not to linger in front of Adela. Everyone in the village knew about the stern nature of the only storekeeper. Even the men were afraid of her. They always behaved quietly, politely, and very decently in the store. Interestingly, Adela's husband was short, quiet, and uncommunicative. Their two sons resembled their father a lot, and from the side it could seem that Adela dominated her husband, making him so quiet. But the village still told stories about how Rodrigo won Adela over. There were love and respect in that family. "Cecilia, tell me what you need." "I would like some inexpensive pasta, some granulated sugar, and vegetable oil, please. And if possible, a small piece of liver for the gravy." Cecilia watched as Adela generously sliced the liver and hurried to say, "Oh, Adela, I don't have enough money for all of this." "It's all right, you can pay me later," Adela replied. "But you know that later," Cecilia hesitated. At that moment, another woman approached them, one of those who had been standing in the store. "Cecilia, take it. I'll cover the extra cost. You've helped me so many times," the woman said. She turned to Adela and continued, "Adela, also weigh out some candies." Cecilia felt like crying, both from embarrassment and from something warm that welled up inside her chest. She placed the money she had on the counter, thanked them, and left. Adela watched her thoughtfully as she walked away. "She's a good girl, but what will become of her? I hope she doesn't follow in her parents' footsteps," she wondered aloud. The woman who offered to pay for Cecilia spoke up. "She shouldn't. She has a better example in front of her." "That's the point, it's an example. But you're close to them, how are things there?" Adela asked. Clara, Cecilia's neighbor, waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't even ask. Ignacio spends whatever he earns on those rare days of his mental clarity. And that wretched Agata doesn't even try to change their lives. I honestly think if it weren't for her, he wouldn't drink like that. He's a good man, but she's a monster and will never say a kind word. Yeah, Ignacio is unlucky with his wife. It's amazing how Agata gave birth to such a girl, another customer chimed in. Adela, you seem to be out of touch. I don't understand. What are you talking about? At that moment, another shopper chimed in. Everyone in the village is saying that Cecilia is not their child. Adela waved her hands in disbelief. Oh, come on. You make up stories, who knows what. Adela, are you really not aware of what people are saying in the village? Although it's calmed down now, people used to talk a lot, the customer persisted. Adela grew curious. Well, tell me, what is this all about? Clara lowered her voice. Ignacio and Agata had been together for about 6 years, if not longer, and they had no children. Rumor has it they had big fights, and then they left, supposedly to change their environment, but they returned 6 months later with Cecilia. They said they didn't even know Agata was already pregnant. Do you believe that? She had been pregnant for 3 months, maybe even longer, and she didn't know. That's what everyone here thinks, that Cecilia can't possibly be their daughter, but they all keep silent. Well, it's true that Agata is so foolish. Ignacio brought her from somewhere else. She's not from around here. Adela stood with her eyes wide open. Wow, what news? Why don't I know anything about this nonsense? Clara laughed. Well, you were on maternity leave yourself back then. Cecilia is just 2 months older than your eldest. And then, while you weren't working, things settled down. Adela leaned forward. Ladies, maybe we should find out everything and take Cecilia away from them? Clara sighed. It's not that simple. Let's say Cecilia isn't theirs. They are her legal parents, so everything was done according to the law, which means her biological parents, if they were even around, didn't want her or aren't here at all. You don't know what's better or worse. All right, ladies, bye. The events of past years continued to be discussed in the store for a while, but then everyone dispersed. Of course, Cecilia knew nothing about the commotion surrounding her origins. She returned home and started preparing dinner. Neither her father nor her mother were home. They had probably gone to the edge of the village again, where their close friend and drinking companion lived. They often spent time there, sometimes even staying for 2 or 3 days without coming home. When Cecilia was 10 years old, it used to frighten her to be alone, but then she got used to it and even liked it. No one wandered around in the middle of the night, trying to sing songs or falling down. Credit should be given to her father. Despite their drinking habits, they never had company at home, and he strictly forbade her mother from inviting anyone. It had gotten dark outside, even though it was spring, but it was already dark by 10 o'clock, and there were still nighttime frosts. Cecilia was drinking a sweet coffee, which was a rarity in their home, and was getting ready to go to sleep. She had to go to school tomorrow. There were 2 more months until the end of her studies, and then another 2 years, and that would be it. She would be able to go to college and leave. Of course, she wouldn't abandon her parents. She would visit occasionally, but not too often. She had no desire to witness their drinking sessions for 2 more years. Cecilia stretched out on her bed, trying to remember when they started drinking. She vividly remembered that her father couldn't see her off on her first day of school. As for her mother, she was already in 3rd grade when she noticed that her mother was cheerful every evening and kind. At that time, due to her childlike naivety, Cecilia thought, well, at least she's not yelling at anyone. Now she understood that it would have been better if her mother had yelled. Cecilia had already drifted off to sleep. The television in their house had been broken for a while, so she always fell asleep with a book. It seemed like she was starting to have some kind of dream when she was awakened by screams outside her window. Cecilia glanced out the window, and she saw people running somewhere, while the sky on one side of the village was crimson. Quickly, Cecilia got dressed and rushed out onto the street. She ran in the direction where the people were hurrying, but after a few steps, her legs became heavy. A house was on fire, and it was evident that it was precisely where her parents' close friend lived. She almost stopped, but then she continued running. She had never run like this before, never in her life. She heard people she ran past shouting at her. "Cecilia, stop, stop. You can't go there." Someone caught her tightly right at the house. "Quiet, girl, you can't go there." She stared at Uncle Rodrigo with wild eyes, and his wife, Adela, standing next to him. She wanted to break free, but Adela held her close, and Cecilia understood everything. She screamed, sobbed, and then everything became hazy. Agata, Cecilia's grandmother, arrived. Cecilia hardly knew her. Her grandmother never interacted with her parents, nor with her. Agata took care of the funeral arrangements. On the day of the funeral, after everything was over, Cecilia lay in her room, quietly crying. She could hear what the women were talking about as they cleared the table. Clara asked when the grandmother would leave. Calling the woman who was supposed to be her grandmother was a struggle. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning." Adela, who was there as well, looked at her with surprise. "Alone?" "Of course, who else should I go with?" "And what about Cecilia?" "Well, that's not my problem anymore. There are special institutions for that." Clara raised her voice. "What are you talking about? The girl has 2 more years to study at school. And you, want to send her to an orphanage? And where should I take her? Maybe take her home with you? That would be the right thing to do." "No, it only seems right to you. But I know that I don't need a stranger in my house." "How can you call your own granddaughter a stranger?" Adela pounded her fist on the table. "I can, apparently. I seem to know a bit more than you do. Perhaps I won't wait until morning. I'll find a way to leave. I don't need this house. If I have to sign any papers in Cecilia's favor, here's my address." And she left. Cecilia heard the door slamming and immediately came out of her room. "I heard everything." "I got it," Cecilia said. She sat on a chair, and Clara embraced her. "Cecilia, maybe she'll change her mind," Clara said. "I don't want to go to her. I'd rather go to an orphanage." The women exchanged glances, and Adela rubbed her eyes in anger. Cecilia was bid farewell by almost the entire village. They brought various treats. Clara baked a large pie. "Cecilia, when you arrive, treat the kids so they'll welcome you warmly." "Okay, Clara, I'll treat them." Throughout the journey, Cecilia looked out the window, wondering if she would ever see all of this again. Adela and Clara said they would keep an eye on the house, but she wasn't sure if she would need it or not. They arrived at a large building with tall gates when it was already dark. Cecilia was taken to a white room where a woman in a white coat and another lady were sitting. While the doctor or nurse was recording information from Cecilia's documents, the other woman approached her. "Why have you taken so many belongings with you? Don't you know that the state takes care of you, and you don't need to bring so much unsanitary stuff here? These are treats for the children." "Sweets and a pie." Cecilia looked perplexed at the angry lady. "Treats, you say? Maybe you spiked something in there? What are you talking about?" "Silence. I'm taking all the treats." She took away all of Cecilia's belongings, inspected them, shook them, and left the girl with only 2 books and a bag of clothes. "And you can take this. But it's for the children. You'll learn your lesson soon enough. On the very first day, you'll end up in solitary." The woman in the white coat hurriedly escorted Cecilia away. "Bad luck for you. Today is Magnolia's shift. She may be a certified caregiver, but she has no heart. Don't be upset, she only does her shift every 3 days. And who are you?" Cecilia wiped away her tears. "I'm Peter, your doctor. Here we are." The woman stopped in front of a door. "The older girls live here. Some have been here since birth, while others, like you, arrived recently. You'll get to know everyone gradually," she said, pushing the door open. Cecilia entered a large room with what seemed like 10 or 12 beds. The room didn't look empty or scary, rather, it had a sense of warmth. Almost every bed had colorful rugs, homemade ones, but they added a genuine coziness. Peter said loudly, "Girls, attention. Meet Cecilia, she will now be living with you." A sigh came from somewhere deep in the room. "And there's one more who nobody needs." Peter immediately turned towards the voice. "Sandra, you're wrong. Cecilia's parents died just a few days ago. Did I something not right?" Cecilia smiled faintly. Many students at school responded in the same way. Peter left, showing Cecilia her bed. The girl walked over and sat down. Tears streamed down with renewed force. A girl around 13 years old appeared beside her and handed her a glass of water. "Don't try to hold back. Everyone cries during the first week. There's no other way." Girls started approaching them. Some sat nearby, some leaned against the bed. "Let's introduce ourselves," said the girl who handed her the water. She seemed to be the leader here, although there were older girls too. "I'm Sandra Rodriguez. My parents sent me here because I was getting in their way." Cecilia raised her eyes in surprise. "You speak about it so calmly? Why should I be upset? Crying won't change anything. I've been here for 7 years already. I can bear it. They should cry. Someday, when I grow up, they'll remember me." Sandra's eyes gleamed with anger. One of the older girls spoke up. "Sandra, stop scaring Cecilia. Don't worry, we have a nice and friendly room. It's just a tradition to share your story when you arrive. We're going to live together now." Cecilia nodded. She tried to keep her words brief, and at the end, she mentioned the conversation she overheard. Sandra looked at her with wide eyes. "Wow, so it's possible that she's not their daughter at all?" Cecilia shrugged. "I don't think so. You can't hide such things in a village. I think Grandma just made a fuss not to take me with her. And I wouldn't have gone anyway." "Well, you're right. Why put yourself in that situation? For example, I ran away from my grandma. She only needed me to get her hands on the money, and then she sent me to the orphanage and froze all the accounts. I'll take charge of my own life when I leave, and Grandma is going crazy there. First, she begged me to come back, saying I was her favorite granddaughter, then she yelled. And then, this is the icing on the cake, she threatened to put me in the hospital and take custody over me." Listening to the girl's stories, Cecilia was in complete shock. She had thought her own situation was a tragedy, but it turned out that tragedies were a common occurrence here. Suddenly, a bell rang somewhere in the corner. Sandra jumped up. "Lie down quickly, cover yourself." All the girls were in their beds within a minute, as if they had fallen under the covers fully clothed. It didn't take 2 minutes before the door to the room opened. Cecilia recognized Magnolia through her half-closed eyelids. She walked through the room, made a satisfied grunt, and left. No one moved. Cecilia was about to say something when the door swung open abruptly, and Magnolia peered in again, but everything was quiet, and finally, she left. Soon, the girls gathered around Cecilia's bed again, this time in the dark. Cecilia asked, "What was that just now?" "Oh, that's our alert system. When the hellhound comes on patrol, they call us from the first room, and then we pass it on to the next, and so on." "Wow, why do you call her the hellhound? Who else is she?" "She is the hellhound itself. Angry and scary. I can see that no one here likes her. Can you imagine? I brought so many treats with me, the neighbors gave me so much, Clara even baked a pie. And she took everything away. That's terrible. And of all times, you had to arrive during her shift. The rest of us are normal." Sandra let out a long sigh. She was generally the most emotional and active one. "Well, let's go to sleep, she might come to check on us." Surprisingly, Cecilia fell asleep quickly. Perhaps the events of the past few days took their toll, or maybe she was just exhausted. In the morning, they were woken up for breakfast and activities. She looked around, everything was new, everything so unusual. They didn't have anything like this in her village. After a couple of weeks, Cecilia settled in completely. She became friends not only with the girls in her room, but also with others. She tried to study as well as she did in the village. Sandra was amazed. "Cecilia, why do you even bother yourself with studying? It's not like anyone needs it now. Do you think you can get into college as an orphan?" "Nonsense, no one will take us anywhere, we're not needed anywhere." Cecilia laughed in response. "And how do you plan to go and tell everyone that you're an orphan?" "Why? I'm not going to tell anyone, and you shouldn't either. When you come in all smart, pass your exams, and get accepted, let them say whatever they want. You would come there to study." Sandra seriously pondered Cecilia's words, but then said, "No, it's not for me. I have a different goal in life." "What goal is that, I wonder?" Sandra moved closer to her. "You know, I can't wait to grow up. When they release me from here, I'm going to rob, let's say, a bank and find my parents. They left to work abroad, or so they said, that's why they abandoned me, you know? They gave up their child to go where a better life awaited them." "Sandra, are you out of your mind? A bank? How do you envision that? It's a crime. They'll catch you before you even get out of there." "No, I'll run away." "That's a bad plan. Do you really love your parents so much that you're willing to do anything to find them?" Sandra looked at her with surprise, and then burst into laughter. "Love them? Are you crazy? I'm going to find them to settle the score." Now it was Cecilia's turn to look at Sandra in astonishment. "And when did you decide that?" "Right away, as soon as I was able to think." Cecilia understood that she needed to say something. She needed to dissuade her from this idea. She knew that it wouldn't be possible to immediately talk someone out of an idea they had carried for years. It required acting gradually. Cecilia simply fell in love with the idea of helping Sandra avoid ruining her life. She didn't have much time, so she decided to seek help from Peter. She chose a day when the orphanage was quiet and knocked on her office door. "Peter, can I come in?" "Of course, Cecilia, come in. Are you sick? Did something happen?" "No, I want to talk, to seek advice." The woman put down her pen and looked attentively at Cecilia. She didn't have any visible pigment spots, didn't look unwell. How many times had girls come to her with the same problem, saying they were pregnant and didn't know how it happened? "Take a seat, Cecilia. What did you want to talk about?" Cecilia sat down, hesitated for a moment, and then looked at the doctor. "Do you know that Sandra is obsessed with the idea that she must find her parents by any means necessary and settle the score with them?" The woman caught her breath. Thank goodness, it wasn't what she had initially thought. "Well, how should I put it? I've heard about it, but I didn't think it was serious." "It's very serious, Peter. Look, she even draws about it." Cecilia handed over a few drawings that, honestly, sent shivers down her spine. "Yes, it's much worse than I thought. We need to involve a psychologist here." "Wait, Peter, if we document the psychological work, it will be recorded in her file." "Well, yes, we always document that kind of thing. But it will only ruin her life." "Well, not exactly, but to some extent, you're right. Do you have another idea?" "I do. That's why I came to you." They talked for almost an hour, and Cecilia left Peter's office feeling satisfied, carrying specialized literature. And the doctor thought, the girl wasn't just thinking simply, she was thinking very logically. Without knowing the basics of psychology, she could give it a try. Maybe she'll succeed. When the time came for Cecilia to leave the orphanage, everyone saw her off. Peter spoke. "Cecilia, I'm begging you, don't give up. You're going to excel, become an excellent, the best psychologist. I promise you, Peter, I won't give up." Cecilia hugged Sandra. "Just don't become a stranger. I left you the address. Once I start studying, I'll message you right away, but regardless, remember that if anything happens, come to my village immediately." It doesn't matter if I'm there or not. I'll go there for a month. I'll let Clara know. Do you get it? Sandra was crying. I get it. Sandra, be a good girl. We will definitely find each other. Cecilia got admitted without any major problems. Later, when the admission lists were posted, the dean approached her. Cecilia, why didn't you mention that you're from an orphanage? Cecilia immediately tensed up. Why does it matter? The dean became flustered. No, don't get me wrong, nothing like that. On the contrary, there would have been some concessions for you. Why? I passed the exams, or is it assumed that children from an orphanage are not as capable? She completely bewildered the dean. He was wise and had seen a lot. Honestly, we've gotten used to the fact that children from orphanages always try to use their orphan status. And here, he received a genuine response as he watched Cecilia leave, thinking that if she wanted, she could achieve anything. Unlike those who spent their time at the university idly, Cecilia studied. Approximately every 2 to 3 months, she would visit the village. The first time she came right after leaving the orphanage. She got off the bus and froze. Everything was so familiar, everything was so beautiful. She hadn't been here for almost 2.5 years. It seemed like everything remained the same, yet everything had changed. She walked slowly, as if absorbing everything she had been deprived of recently. The path from the bus stop to her house led through the village store. Of course, Cecilia couldn't just pass by. She entered and stood to the side. There were few people, and Cecilia stood there, examining the shop windows. Adela glanced at her and went to serve another customer. When there was no one left in the store, the woman asked, "Can I show you something?" Cecilia turned to her, and her lips automatically stretched into a smile. "Hello, Adela." The woman stared at her for a moment, then her eyes widened. "Cecilia, it can't be you." She came out from behind the counter and rushed to hug the girl. "Oh my God, you've grown up, you're such a real beauty." "Well, nonsense, I'm not a real beauty at all." The door of the store opened, and Clara entered. "Hello, who are you hugging like that?" Clara looked at Cecilia with curiosity and suddenly stopped smiling. "It's me, Clara." She had to hug with Clara for another 5 minutes. In the evening, a real celebration was arranged at Cecilia's home. And when she was leaving, so much was brought to her that Cecilia thought she would never be able to carry it all. She enjoyed studying so much that she was willing to spend day and night at the university. By the way, Cecilia became friends with the same dean she talked to during her admission. Now she felt embarrassed in front of him. Well, she had almost been rude to him. Somewhere during her 3rd year, Cecilia was returning from a party. It was a classmate's birthday. The evening was warm, the sky beautiful, and although it was quite late, Cecilia decided to take a walk. She simply savored it because it was rare for her to take a leisurely stroll. Studying and work always consumed her time. Even in her first year, Cecilia found a part-time job, and now she worked at the nursing home 3 times a week. Honestly, it was tough, not so much physically as mentally. So many people who had lived their lives so differently, yet ended up in the same place as those who wasted their lives away. There were lonely people and those who had children and grandchildren living nearby. But they simply became unnecessary. Cecilia got lost in her thoughts and passed by the turn to her street. She turned around and was about to go back when she heard murmuring from the bushes. Her initial impulse was to run, but then she realized that someone might need her help. She approached the bushes. "Who's there? Do you need help?" The bushes rustled, and a young man, about 25 to 27 years old, appeared in front of her. He was tall, well-built, dressed very modestly, and his clothes hadn't seen a wash in a long time. Most importantly, he was clearly drunk. "Who's there? Do you need help?" He looked at her with blurry eyes. For some reason, Cecilia wasn't scared, probably because despite his condition, his eyes were still very kind. "Hello," she mimicked him, "aren't you ashamed to scare people?" I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. The guy replied and hiccuped. Cecilia couldn't help but smile. Why are you hiding in the bushes? I'm not hiding, I'm thinking. What are you thinking about? Why life is so unfair to me? The young man shook his head, and Cecilia understood that he was just a desperate person trying to solve all his problems with alcohol. And you decided to solve all your problems with alcohol? He waved his hand. You don't understand anything. My girlfriend broke up with me, and then I lost my job. Well, that's a great reason to stop being human. If your girlfriend broke up with you, it means you're not meant for each other. And as for the job, I haven't heard of a young, healthy guy who couldn't find work in the city. The young man was looking condescendingly at her. It's easy for you to talk when you have support from everywhere. Your mommy, your daddy, and a bunch of others who worry about you. But what about when you're all alone in the world? The young man seemed like he was about to shed a tear, but Cecilia didn't give him the opportunity. Well, of course, that's what you think, but I, for example, have no one either. I grew up in an orphanage. He looked at her skeptically. You? Yes, me. What's so surprising about that? Can't lonely people live normal lives? Can't they start their own families so as not to be lonely? They talked until morning. The guy's name was Sergio, and as they discussed in lectures at university, he simply broke down. From that day on, Sergio became someone Cecilia felt obligated to help. He stopped drinking. It turned out he wasn't an alcoholic, everything just piled up on him. That's why he drank. 2 weeks later, Sergio got lucky and found a job, and Cecilia was overjoyed like a child. He became much more confident, started earning a good salary. He dressed up, got new shoes, and even renovated his little apartment. Cecilia insisted that Sergio enroll in various courses. He resisted as much as he could. Cecilia, but why do I need all this? Tell me. Sergio, you need to be prepared for any situation. What if you lose your job? You will know a lot, you'll be capable of so many things. Sergio looked at her with loving eyes, and Cecilia felt a bit embarrassed, although she had never noticed that before when they were with Sergio among others. Everyone in their group had gotten married a long time ago. Sergio would meet her after classes whenever he could, always with flowers, and she would scold him. Why do you waste money on flowers? Cecilia, you don't understand, nothing is too good for you. You are the best person in the world. Cecilia herself didn't realize how their relationship had entered a different phase. She had exams ahead of her, a thesis defense, and then they planned to get married. After receiving her diploma, they sat in a cafe and celebrated this milestone. Cecilia spoke. I said I wanted to become a psychologist. And now I'm a specialist, I can help people. Sergio smiled looking at her. You've already helped the most important person in your life. And Cecilia laughed. You're not modest at all. Noticing that Sergio seemed offended, she hurried to say, Oh, come on, are you offended? Of course, you're the most important person. Cecilia, have you ever thought about making a family the most important thing in your life? I've always wanted a big family. Do you know how you dream about it? But I'm a man, I have to work and earn a living, and I wish we had at least 2 children. I want you to be with them at home, to know all the activities they're involved in, so that I can hurry home to you and the kids would be waiting for me. Cecilia almost burst into tears. Of course, can a woman desire anything else? After a modest wedding, they decided to spend a couple of weeks in Cecilia's village. You can't imagine how wonderful it is there. You've simply never seen such beauty in your life, and the people. Sergio skeptically snorted. Well, I won't argue with you about the beauty. I've been to the countryside, seen untouched nature. But when it comes to people, I have serious doubts. I've always thought that gossipers and alcoholics live in the village. Sergio, what are you talking about? That's all untrue, and soon you'll see it for yourself. They had been driving for half an hour, and Cecilia felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't been to the village in almost a year, and she missed everything and everyone. She missed the grass, the sunshine, the sauna. Cecilia jumped out of the car at the gate. "Oh, how wonderful it is." She twirled around and laughed. Sergio watched her and realized that he had ended up with a truly intelligent and beautiful woman. Cecilia, Clara hurried toward them. As soon as the girl saw her, she rushed toward her and hugged her tightly. "Clara, how I missed you." The woman embraced her, then turned her around, examining her. "You've become so beautiful, so fashionable, I almost didn't recognize you. And who is this with you?" She looked at Sergio with curiosity. He approached and smiled. "Let me introduce myself. I'm the husband of this beautiful and fashionable lady." Clara clapped her hands. "What? Husband? Really?" Cecilia laughed. "Yes, Clara, a real one indeed." "How can it be? How did this happen?" "Oh, we must celebrate. We need to invite the rest of the women." "Clara, we've been married for only 2 days." "Well, that's great. I'll call Adela, and we'll organize everything by the evening." Sergio embraced Clara. "Of course, just come in the evening, and we'll handle everything ourselves, right, Cecilia?" She looked at her husband with loving eyes. He was so good and understanding. "Of course." Clara rushed away as fast as her age allowed. Cecilia and Sergio entered the house. Everything was dusty and gray. Sergio smiled. "What do you say, wife? Shall we get to work? I'll heat up the sauna, and you can open the windows. Let's tidy up. Oh, Sergio, we also need to go to the store and cook something. You can't imagine, but the evening in the village starts at 6. Sergio scratched his forehead. "Well, wait, no time to lose then. We have to start somewhere. I'll heat up the sauna, then we'll go to the store, and then you can give me orders for tidying up. Won't I be able to chop the salad?" Cecilia hugged him, looking into his eyes. "You're the best." About 2 hours later, Cecilia, covered in dust and cobwebs, was giving orders to Sergio, who, all covered in flour, was wearing an apron as he tried to carry everything out. Someone entered through the open door. "Hello, can you please tell me how I can find Cecilia?" Cecilia turned around, but the woman, or rather, the young girl who had arrived, was standing against the sun, making it difficult to see her. Sergio came out from the kitchen. "I'm Cecilia, do I know you?" She took a step closer and was stunned. The girl was looking at her with tear-filled eyes. "Hello, Cecilia." "Sandra, it can't be you, my dear Sandra." The girls embraced and burst into tears. Of course, Sergio knew about Sandra, knew that Cecilia had been searching for her but couldn't find her. He knew that Cecilia had been very worried. After waiting for about 15 minutes, he decisively approached them. "All right, ladies. You'll have plenty of time to cry later. We have work to do now. Guests will be arriving soon, and we can't afford to waste time." Sandra looked at him fearfully, while Cecilia laughed. "You're always right. Sandra, it's my husband, Sergio. We got married just 2 days ago and arrived here today. The dining table needs attention, and you came at the perfect time. Let's do it all together, and then in the evening, we'll talk about everything." It became more fun with the three of them. Sandra seemed to have shed some kind of numbness that had been on her for the past couple of months. She had come here as for the last hope. All she needed was to talk to Cecilia. Cecilia always steered her conversations in the right direction. It was Cecilia who had once made her change her desire to get even with her parents into a desire to simply live. Sandra had found herself in an ugly situation. She fell in love, she believed in her man, and they had so many plans. They decided to start their own business. Sandra, who had been working at the factory for almost a year, took a loan, and after that, her fiancé vanished into thin air. He was there one moment and gone the next. But Sandra was not the type to give up. She picked herself up and found him. He was preparing for his wedding and, smirking right at her, he said, "What brought you here?" "The business didn't work out. I was upset, didn't want to tell you. And then I met someone who helped me forget everything." Sandra, crying, asked, "So, you won't repay the money you owe me?" "Sandra, what money? I told you it didn't work out. You should leave now before my bride arrives. She's very jealous and very vindictive, and her father is a powerful man who could crush you without leaving a trace." Sandra knew perfectly well that he was lying to her, but what could she do now? The investigators had already told her that she had willingly given him everything. Sandra cried at home for 2 days, and then she took 2 weeks off and went to the village, to the address that Cecilia had given her once. She didn't hope for anything, or maybe she did hope that one of the neighbors would give her Cecilia's contact information. She didn't need anything from Cecilia, just to talk. But when she saw her, and with a young man beside her, she became flustered. Maybe Cecilia was too busy to see her, but Cecilia welcomed her as if she were family. Within an hour, Sandra, albeit temporarily, forgot about everything that had happened to her. She happily helped with tidying up, and then she helped Sergio, who turned out to be a very cheerful and good-natured person. Somewhere deep down, envy pricked at her. Look how effortlessly everything worked out for Cecilia, while nothing seemed to go smoothly for her. In the evening, a lot of people gathered in Cecilia's yard. Sergio was worried that they wouldn't have enough food, but there was no need to worry. Everyone brought something with them. Some brought salads, others brought homemade sausages, and someone brought a pot of hot potatoes. And, of course, almost every household brought their own homemade liqueurs and stronger spirits. The next day, at a family council meeting, after hearing Sandra's story, Thai decided to help her. Sergio immediately suggested talking to his colleagues to see if they could hire Sandra at his workplace. "Even our simplest worker earns twice as much as you did at your factory. What's done is done. You'll still be asked about the loan, but we need to find a way to get through this." Sandra cried, thanked them, and said that she would definitely return them the favor someday. Cecilia was very proud of Sergio and, to a small extent, herself. If it weren't for her in the past, his life would be different. But she never mentioned it, not in any word. After returning to the city, she decided to stay at home for a little while until they settled into their new family nest. Sergio's apartment was small, but still. She went shopping, choosing wallpapers, paint, and then they decided that they needed to replace the sofa with a more modern one. They made a choice, but when Cecilia saw the price, she immediately said, "No, we won't buy it." Sergio laughed. "We will. I'll earn more." Cecilia enjoyed the role of a homemaker, so she postponed the question of finding a job for a while. About a year later, Sergio started thinking about opening his own company. Cecilia saw how he couldn't make up his mind, but she really wanted him to succeed. "Sergio, something is bothering you, isn't it?" "I can see it," she said. He smiled at her. "I keep forgetting that you see people through and through." "Yes, Cecilia, I've calculated everything several times, but who knows what kind of employees we'll get, what kind of suppliers. It's impossible to plan everything." "That's good that you think everything through. You know what? Let me come with you to the interviews. I'll be able to see what kind of person they are," Cecilia suggested. "Wow, Cecilia, that would be wonderful," he replied. "Well, of course, we're family after all." After the company was already open, Sandra came to visit. "Sandra, why don't you visit more often?" Cecilia asked. "Well, you have your own business now. You've opened a company." "Oh, stop it. It's just starting to work. Who knows what will come out of it?" Cecilia replied. "No, with Sergio, you can be sure of success. You both have got what it takes," Sandra said confidently. Sandra stood up and walked around the kitchen. "Oh, if only I could meet someone like Sergio. I would also turn my life around." Cecilia didn't quite like her words, but she smiled and replied, "Then take anyone and mold them into your own Sergio." Sandra looked at her as if she were crazy. "Me? But you know that I want everything and right away." Cecilia laughed. "Sandra, but you're already grown up. You know perfectly well that it doesn't work like that. But why doesn't it work out this way?" Sandra pouted and sat back down, poured herself a full glass of wine, and downed it in one gulp. "What kind of life is this? You want one thing, but it always turns out to be something else." "But it's not just you who have the same problems," Cecilia replied. "Cecilia, tell me, how did you and Sergio meet?" Cecilia shrugged. "Well, just on the street, nothing romantic." "Well, there you go. I thought there was a whole romantic story behind it." "No, it's just like everyone else." Cecilia would never tell anyone the story of how they met. The only thing everyone knew was that both Sergio and Cecilia came from an orphanage. "Cecilia, could you please talk to your husband?" Sandra said. "About what?" "Well, when there's a job opening, have him take me in. I feel more at ease when one of you is around." Cecilia smiled. "Of course, I'll talk to him, Sandra." They stayed up late talking and didn't even notice when Sergio came home. He turned on the light in the kitchen. "So, are we having the late-night gathering?" he asked. Cecilia laughed as she watched Sandra blink her eyes from the bright light. She kissed her husband, and Sandra jumped up. "Oh, damn, I got carried away. I have to work in the morning." Sandra pecked Cecilia on the cheek, glanced at Sergio, their eyes met briefly, and they quickly looked away from each other. Cecilia fell asleep quickly, probably due to the alcohol, while Sergio stared into the darkness, lost in thought. It happened a month ago. He sat in his new office, which was still empty. Outside the window, it was deep evening, and Sergio tried to arrange the furniture himself so as not to burden the workers. Suddenly, the door opened, and to his surprise, Sandra walked in. "Oh, Sandra, what are you doing here?" he asked. She didn't answer, walked around the office, and for some reason, lowered the shutters. She had a bottle of wine in her hands, and, in general, she seemed different today. Her hair was down, and Sergio had never seen it down before. It turned out to be wavy and soft, visually appealing. Cecilia wore a long coat cinched at the waist with a belt. "I came to congratulate you," she said, extending the bottle of wine. "I also brought a corkscrew." Sandra took out a corkscrew from her pocket, and only now did Sergio notice that the girl was already drunk. He opened the bottle, took out 2 teacups. "Yes, I was drinking alone at home." "You see, Sergio, I don't even have anyone to have a drink with," she said, looking at him with sad eyes, which made him feel awkward. "Well, come on, I'll have a drink with you," he said. They drank, and Sandra burst into tears. She started telling him about how she wanted to live, how nothing worked out for her. Eventually, Sandra broke down, but Sergio didn't know what to do. He hugged her, wanting to comfort her, but the girl suddenly undid her belt, and the coat fell to his feet. You forgot your dress," he said. Sandra stood there silently, and Sergio still didn't understand how it all happened. Was it the wine they drank, or the atmosphere, or Sandra, who was so close? Then he apologized to her, but she waved it off. "Stop it, that's why I came here," Sandra said. "Sandra, we won't tell Cecilia anything, right?" "Of course not," Sandra decided silently, "not yet. The time hasn't come yet." Sergio glanced at his wife with narrowed eyes. He didn't want to act this way, but it happened. And overall, he wasn't at fault, it was all her friends' doing. So Cecilia was to blame herself for having friends worse than enemies. Though today, when he saw Cecilia, he felt a sudden rush of heat. He immediately remembered, almost felt what she was like. She was different. She was like a tigress, like a lioness. Cecilia would never come to him in such a manner in her life, let alone behave like Sandra. After Sandra, he felt like a squeezed lemon, but after Cecilia, he didn't feel anything. Yes, he was her first, which immensely boosted his ego, but that was where the pros ended. Cecilia was gentle, obedient, but utterly devoid of initiative, completely passive. Sergio didn't know that he lacked passion until he found himself alone with Sandra. Sandra knew the score and everything, and now Sergio was perplexed. He loved Cecilia, but he also needed Sandra. Before falling asleep, he had time to think. After all, he was a businessman now, and all businessmen, even as small as he was at the moment, should and must have both a wife and a mistress. In the morning, when Cecilia served breakfast before him, Sergio asked, "Cecilia, you seem mysterious. Did something happen?" "No, Sergio. I need to talk to you, or rather, ask you a favor." "What is it?" "You see, Sandra says she feels more comfortable when we're around. Well, she can't stay at home with me. So, she asked me to talk to you on her behalf. Maybe someday you'll have a place for her." "Excellent, let her come. I actually need someone to take care of paperwork." And Cecilia pondered for a moment. "Sergio, is there anything else? I would gladly take care of paperwork. It's boring for me to stay at home." Sergio tensed up. "Cecilia, what are you thinking? Why should you do paperwork? Firstly, you don't understand anything about that field, and secondly, a husband and wife shouldn't work together." "But..." Sergio hurried to embrace her. "No, why do you need all this? Your calling is the family, husband, and children. We'll probably have children soon, right?" Cecilia smiled. Sergio's words about children erased all doubts. "All right, Sergio, as always, you're right." 6 months later, they bought a nice 3-bedroom apartment. Cecilia walked through the rooms, already envisioning how everything would be. Sandra also came to the housewarming. "Well, Cecilia, now you're a true businessman's wife. You don't work anywhere, and the apartment is gorgeous. You should go to salons, make yourself beautiful, and that's it." Cecilia smiled. "Beauty salons? I already like everything as it is." Sandra glanced at her friend and thought to herself. And it was right, she should have gone there. Her hair was colorless, her lashes were never touched by mascara, her nails were neat but trimmed to the root. Of course, manicures hindered doing household chores and moving furniture. "Oh, Cecilia, you healed people's souls but buried your own," thought Sandra. But on the other hand, it worked in Sandra's favor because Sergio couldn't do without her anymore. And Sandra did everything to make him constantly think of her. About a week after moving, Cecilia noticed something was wrong. Her husband was irritable, always responding inappropriately. Cecilia sat him down in front of her. Nobody but her could help her husband regain emotional balance. "Sergio, what's going on with you? You haven't been yourself lately." He flinched and looked at Cecilia. "No, she definitely doesn't know anything. Cecilia, I've been offered a deal. You see, if I agree and do everything right, it will instantly elevate my company several steps higher. But if I fail, the company could be closed." And Cecilia smiled. Well, now she can be useful to her husband, as always when he was in a dead end. "Sergio, let's start from the beginning. Have you done something similar before?" They talked for several hours. Sergio drew and calculated something, while Cecilia provided him with mental support. She instilled confidence in him. Sergio went ahead with the deal. The tense waiting lasted for 2 months, and Cecilia supported her husband as best she could. He clung to her like a child and said he was literally energized by her presence. And then he called and screamed into the phone. "Cecilia, it's done. They're satisfied, they've transferred the money." Cecilia almost burst into tears. "You see, you can do anything. Should I prepare a dinner to celebrate it?" "Cecilia, I'll call you back. I can't talk right now." Sergio hung up. This wasn't like him, he had never acted this way before. But it's okay, he's just very excited. Cecilia went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. All right, what can I surprise Sergio with today? I think I'll prepare fish. Sergio loves it. Meanwhile, Sandra was sitting in Sergio's office. Sergio, you promised me earrings, remember? If the deal goes well? Sergio approached Sandra. No problem, we'll go and buy them right now, and then to a restaurant, and then to your place. Sandra looked at him with surprise. And what, are you staying overnight too? Maybe I will. Are you serious? Then I don't need any earrings today, we'll buy them later. Let's drop by the store and then come to my place. Sandra really wanted the earrings, but she understood that a bigger game had begun. Just a pair of earrings wouldn't be enough for her. She wanted to have all of Sergio, completely. Over the past couple of years, he had built up his company so well, and it seemed like it would only get better. So if she didn't miss her chance, she would have a whole bag of such earrings. Are you ready to exchange the earrings for my companionship? Sandra leaned tenderly toward him. Of course. What could compare to you? Sandra's voice took on a low tone that Sergio couldn't calmly listen to. On the way, he scolded himself mentally. How could he think that Sandra was a material girl? She was the best, she was perfect. She was the kind of woman one could only dream of. They would celebrate his deal now, celebrate it the way it deserved. Cecilia took out the fish, unwrapped the package, and started washing it when she suddenly felt nauseous, causing her to drop it on the floor. She rushed to the bathroom. Half an hour later, pale and trembling, she sat on the couch, trying to retrieve her calendar from her purse with shaking hands. She looked at it and couldn't believe it. Amidst all the chaos of the deal, she had missed everything. Her period was 2 weeks late. Instant relief washed over her. She reached for the phone but then put it down. No, Sergio wouldn't say anything now. He would tell her everything over the celebratory dinner in the evening. She imagined how happy he would be. Cecilia sat alone in the large apartment and smiled. After catching her breath, she held a towel to her nose, gathered all the fish, and put it in the freezer. It seemed she wouldn't be able to cook it for a long time now, but that was fine. She would prepare something else. A couple of hours later, the table was set. Cecilia looked at the clock. It was almost 9 p.m. Sergio was late for some reason. Another hour passed. She finally decided to call him and find out when he would arrive. Sergio didn't pick up for a long time, and when he finally did, Cecilia realized he had been drinking, and quite heavily. Sergio, where are you? Cecilia, do I have to tell you every move I make? She was taken aback, and then she heard a woman's laughter. Sergio, I'm actually waiting for you, the table. He didn't let her finish. Don't wait, go to bed. I'm celebrating with my partners. I'll be home tomorrow. And he hung up. Cecilia stared at the phone in bewilderment. How was she supposed to understand what don't wait meant? She sat there for a long time. It was already dawn when Cecilia finally went to bed. She couldn't worry now. She needed to sleep a lot. When Sergio hung up the phone, Sandra immediately spoke up. I'm so tired of getting nervous every time the phone rings. Sergio, tell me, what does Cecilia mean to you? Just an ordinary housewife, sitting around doing nothing. Aren't you bored with her? Sergio leaned back on the pillow. Boring. You know, she's more like a mother to me than a wife. I mean, she cooks, takes care of me and all that. Sandra leaned toward him. You're cool, you have a business. Soon they'll start inviting you to parties where people from a completely different circle hang out, and you? How will you go there with her? And what are you suggesting? You need a completely different wife. What do you mean? Beautiful, fashionable, someone you won't be ashamed to be seen with in any social gathering. Sergio didn't get angry as Sandra had feared, he simply smiled. So, I understand you're offering yourself? Sandra decided to go for it, whatever happens. This was the perfect moment. Why not? We look great together, understand each other perfectly, work together, which means I'm aware of your affairs. But, most importantly, we feel at ease with each other. Sergio couldn't deny Sandra's reasoning. Of course, Sandra was far behind Cecilia in terms of intellect, but he was a man. He didn't need a clever nerd next to him. He needed a real woman. You know, Sandra, your proposal is very interesting. I'll think about it tomorrow. That evening, Sandra outdid herself. She had to do everything to make Sergio understand the difference between Cecilia and her. When Sergio fell asleep, Sandra took a shower, put on a robe, took a glass, and went out to the balcony. The lights of the vast city spread out before her. Soon everyone here will know me. She thought about how everything could have turned out completely differently, but it turned out this way, which meant it was meant to be. Sergio came home only at noon. He looked disheveled, and Cecilia couldn't be mistaken. There was a scent of women's perfume on him. It was a familiar scent, but she wouldn't guess. Sergio, what does all this mean? He glanced at the table that had been set since yesterday, which Cecilia deliberately hadn't cleared, walked over, poured himself some wine, and drank. What exactly? You wasn't home at night. Yes, so what? Cecilia was taken aback. She didn't expect him to speak to her like that. At the very least, she expected him to apologize. Cecilia, I'm going to sleep. You know, I wanted to tell you that I'll have a lot of work now. You'll be alone all the time, and the weather outside is so beautiful. Maybe you should go to the countryside? Cecilia didn't have time to reply. He closed the bedroom door behind him. She also packed up and went outside. She wandered around for a long time, not knowing what to do, and by evening, she called her friend. Sandra, hi, can we talk? No, what's wrong with your voice? Let's meet, I need to talk. I don't know what to do. Of course, where are you? 30 minutes later, the friends were sitting in a cafe. Cecilia was telling Sandra what had happened. You see, it's like he's distancing himself from me, like he's become a stranger. And today, he even announced that he'll be busy and suggested me to go to the countryside to relax. You know, I didn't even get a chance to tell him the most important thing. Sandra looked at her with raised eyebrows. And what is the most important thing? Cecilia smiled. I'm pregnant. Sandra froze, staring at Cecilia with wide eyes. Are you serious? It can't get any more serious. Congratulations. That's wonderful. Thank you, Sandra. I'm so glad to have you. Sandra smiled. Well then, my friend, don't let anyone trample over you. You used to be my psychologist once, and now I'll be yours. If he's behaving like this, it means he's confident that you won't go anywhere. We need to convince him otherwise. You know why he mentioned the countryside? Because he believes you won't go anywhere and will obediently wait for him day and night, but that's no good. What should I do then? You need to go. At least for a couple of weeks, and under no circumstances should you tell him about the pregnancy. Why? Damn it, Cecilia, have you lost all your skills? Of course, he'll be relieved, apologize to you, and you'll melt and stay. And he'll be convinced that you're definitely not going anywhere. You have to understand, if you leave for a couple of weeks, Sergio will feel your absence. And when he finds out that you weren't afraid to leave, even while pregnant, he will finally remember that you're a human being and come to his senses. You simply spoiled him. Sandra fell silent. Pregnant Cecilia was clearly an extra element in her plan, but with her help, she could exert pressure on her friend. Cecilia thought for a long time. She really wanted to snap at Sandra and say, "Get out of here and stop interfering with normal people's lives," but she patiently remained silent. Cecilia lifted her head. Thank you, Sandra. I'll do exactly as you advised. Tomorrow morning, as soon as he leaves for work, I'll go. That's right, you're a smart girl. You can't always help others, you need to help yourself too. Sergio left the room only when Cecilia was already lying in another one. It didn't matter. She would go, breathe some fresh air, and let him stay here as he pleases. In the morning, as soon as Sergio slammed the door, Cecilia started packing her things. She didn't take much. It would take only 2 weeks. Besides, Sergio might come after her sooner. She left a note for her husband. "You're right, I need to have a rest." As Cecilia had anticipated, her husband arrived earlier. He came in 3 days, but not for her. She rushed out onto the street to meet him, but immediately stopped. Sergio was unloading suitcases and her books from the car. He turned around and saw her. "Cecilia, you're a smart woman, that's your only virtue, but that's enough to understand me." "Well, you don't suit me now, you're different. You won't be able to shine, to be the way you should at social events." Cecilia suddenly calmed down, even smiled. "Are you already being invited to social events?" Sergio was slightly embarrassed, but then answered, "Well, you know it's just a matter of time. The company is growing, and soon I'll surpass many in the market. And what about us?" "Fine, how will I live? I don't have a place to stay in the city, no job. How are we going to solve this? After all, you never let me work. We won't solve anything. Everyone knows perfectly well that I was the one working in our family. So, Cecilia, nothing will come your way, and don't even think about getting it. And as for living? You were born here, so live at this place. You have a home, don't you?" Sergio quickly got into the car and drove away. Cecilia slumped to the ground by the gate. What was she supposed to do? How would she live? And the baby? Cecilia cried, howled, and she didn't remember how Clara found her, how she practically carried her to her house. Then she ran to get a paramedic. The next day, Cecilia called Sandra. "Sandra. Cecilia, let's get everything straight right away. You'll find out someday anyway. You're not right for Sergio, he'll be much better off with me." "So, it's you?" "Sandra, how could you? You were like a sister to me. I always shared everything with you. Oh, let's deal without this sentimental nonsense. Everyone lives the way they can. You're a mushy, naive fool. Well, don't call me anymore. Now I have to redo your rustic style in my apartment for a month." And Sandra disconnected the call. Cecilia felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. Leaning against the wall, she walked out onto the street, trying to reach Clara's house before fainting. She almost made it, but fell near her neighbor's gate. "Cecilia." She abruptly opened her eyes, and a young man leaned over her. Judging by the white coat, he was a doctor. "Oh, how did I end up here?" "Hello to you too. Don't worry, an ambulance brought you here." Cecilia tried to sit up, but the doctor prevented her from doing so. No. Absolutely no getting up for at least another day." "Why?" "Something tells me you want to keep the baby." And Cecilia, who was convinced that the baby was already gone, immediately lay back down. "Doctor, I'm begging you." And then he smiled with a kind, human smile. "I promise you, I'll do everything I can, and even a little more." The doctor's name was Jamie. He was the head of the department where Cecilia was admitted. He explained that the neighbor's grandmothers had called an ambulance for her, and it was only because the ambulance was close to the village that the baby was saved. He often sat by her bedside, and they had many conversations while the neighboring patients exchanged knowing glances. Cecilia herself felt embarrassed when the doctor came in, but she knew she was eagerly awaiting his visits. One day, he asked her a question. "Cecilia, I saw in your documents that you're married. Why isn't your husband here with you? You could say that I'm no longer married. My husband chose someone else over me." "But what about the baby?" "He doesn't know anything, and he won't find out." At that moment, cries could be heard in the corridor. A woman was sobbing. "Excuse me, I'll go see what's happening." Jamie quickly left the room. But can women stay put when something is happening in the corridor? And indeed, a woman in the corridor was having a hysterical breakdown, and Cecilia realized that she had some pregnancy complications, and the baby was long awaited. Neither her husband nor the nurses nor Jamie could calm her down. And then, suddenly, Cecilia remembered everything she had been taught. She took a resolute step forward, and 15 minutes later, she and the pregnant woman were sitting together, peacefully talking. The woman's husband was almost kissing Cecilia's hands, and he took his wife out of the hospital. Jamie approached her. "Cecilia, you really surprised everyone." She smiled. "Nonsense. You know, pregnant women often have mood swings and hysterics. It was all part of my exam." "Are you a psychologist?" "Actually, yes, but no. I studied to be a psychologist, but I never practiced it a single day." "That's amazing. You have no idea how amazing that is." Jamie headed towards the door of the room but abruptly stopped. "Cecilia, I even forgot why I came. Could you come with me? Our director wants to see you." The doctor theatrically rolled his eyes and raised a finger. Cecilia laughed. "What does he want from me?" "Don't worry. I suspect he wants to express his gratitude to you." Cecilia shrugged. "Well, only if it's gratitude." They went up one floor. As they walked, Cecilia learned that there was a private wing in this hospital where the wives of powerful men are kept for observation and then give birth. This woman, the wife of some high-ranking official, was experiencing a difficult pregnancy, but she categorically refused to be admitted to the hospital. Instead, she was brought in by an ambulance twice a week. Each time could be her last. Fortunately, her husband understood this, but she yelled that she would wipe out this clinic. Jamie knocked on the office door and cracked it open. "May we come in?" Yes, come in." A man stood up to greet them. He was handsome, around 50 to 55 years old, with black hair streaked with gray, a short haircut, and a black suit. "Very pleased to see you." He stepped towards her, and suddenly Cecilia froze. She couldn't understand why he was looking at her like that. Finally, as if he remembered something, he thanked her profusely, and when Jamie mentioned that she was a qualified psychologist, he even stood up. "Listen, I have a proposal for you. Your maternity leave is still far off. Perhaps you would agree to work for us? Believe me, the salary is very generous." Cecilia was taken aback. "But don't you need a candidate with work experience for a decent salary?" "We do, but no one can handle it. These ladies, you know, with their temperaments." She looked at the director and realized that she now had a chance to pull herself out. "May I sit down?" "Of course, I'm sorry, I got a bit flustered." Cecilia sat down and remained silent for a while. Then, in a nutshell, she told her story. "As you can understand, I don't have housing in the city. If it's possible to allocate some room here, I would definitely agree. It's a chance for me to survive." Antonio, the name of the hospital director, smiled. "Oh, come on, we've been operating on a commercial basis for quite some time now. The hospital can easily rent an apartment for you, so don't worry about that." A week later, Cecilia moved into her new apartment. Jamie drove her to the village to collect her belongings, and as she was getting ready, he couldn't help but admire her beauty. "I have never seen such beautiful nature anywhere. Everything here seems perfect and harmonious. You're very lucky to have a home in such a place." Cecilia smiled. "That's true. You know, sometimes after a bath, you go outside, sit on a bench, and the beauty in front of you is so captivating that you don't want to go back home." She suddenly caught Jamie's attentive gaze and felt embarrassed. What was she thinking? She was pregnant with another man's child, or rather, her husband's. By the way, she needed to file divorce papers and turn this page over. 5 years passed. Sergio sat at the table, facing Sandra. He stared at a point on the tablecloth and listened to what his wife was saying. "I can't live like this. When I married you, you were completely different. You were building your business, you had money. And now? You managed to squander it all. Are you really that stupid? I don't understand how you were capable of anything before. Sergio clenched his fists. How did you do that? He had Cecilia, who believed in him and supported him, not Sandra, who only knew one word, give. Sergio vividly remembered how he failed his first deal, one failure in an endless series. As usual, as before, he came home and called Sandra, just as he used to do when he lived with Cecilia. Sandra came out of the room and asked in an annoyed voice, "Well, what is it?" "I was about to take a bath." "Sandra, sit down. I want to tell you about a deal I've been offered. We need to think whether we should take it or not. Are you out of your mind? Figure it out yourself. I'm not interested in your deals and all that nonsense." Sandra disappeared behind the door, and Sergio thought, well, maybe she was right. He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing. When the deal fell through and the company suffered significant losses, he remembered Cecilia. Yes, if he had consulted her as usual, everything would have been fine. "What do you want?" "The firm is going through tough times. We lost several deals, and now no one wants to work with us." "With you? Because you're utterly useless." "Where did you say Cecilia found you?" "In the bushes? That's where you belong." "I don't understand." "What's there to understand? I want you to leave." "But this is my apartment." "What do you mean?" "You gave it to me as a wedding gift." "But Sandra..." Sergio knew very well that his wife had a lover. He knew that they would have to part ways anyway, but lately he lacked self-confidence, so he remained silent. "Where will I go?" "That's your problem. You can return to your Cecilia. By the way, when you left her, she was pregnant. So I'm sure she'll be thrilled to see you." Sergio looked at Sandra and wanted to hit her more than anything. Only now did he realize what a mistake he had made. Sergio stood up. "Well, I think I will do just that." He walked out onto the street and got into his car. "Okay, I need to think this through." Of course, Cecilia loved him deeply, and it's not even a question that she'll forgive him sooner or later. He needs her to forgive him right away because he simply has nowhere to stay. He didn't want to see Sandra anymore. Where could Cecilia be? Obviously in her village. If she was pregnant, then she had no reason to be in the city. Who needs her with a belly and then with a little child? There's a chance that once the child grows up, she might rent something in the city and find a job, but that's still unlikely. There's no job where you can work only while the child is in daycare and have enough for a living and rent. So she's definitely in the village. Sergio took out his wallet. All right, there's enough for gifts. He needs to buy a ring and propose her. One more time. Cecilia was of romantic nature, she would melt for sure. And something for the child as well. Damn, it's unfortunate that he doesn't know who's in there. But he can buy something that suits both a boy and a girl. For example, an art set. He'll appear as their savior, their helper, and show remorse. Sergio smiled. He needed Cecilia like he needed air, and now he realized that without her support, he was truly nothing. The important thing is not to show it, so that she would be grateful to him for coming back. Sergio drove out of the yard and headed to the shopping center. He would have to spend a bit. Those were the last and only funds he had because the company went under the hammer this morning. But there was nothing he could do. If he wanted to live decently, he had to pay the price. Cecilia, they delivered a gift. Very well, lose. Ask the security guard to put it in the car, thank you. Cecilia looked out the window, watching as the guard opened her car and carefully slid the box with the trendy, slim television onto the back seat. Well, Clara would be pleasantly surprised. She mentioned once that she would like to have such a television. It was quite expensive, and she couldn't save up for it. Cecilia remembered, and here was a perfect opportunity. A week ago, their neighbor called and invited their family to her anniversary celebration. Cecilia, I understand you're a busy woman now, but I would really love for you to come. And Valerio, and Arturo, and Antonio. Of course, we'll come, Clara. How old will you be? 18. Clara laughed. It would be nice to be 18, but unfortunately, I'm 75. Cecilia hung up and smiled. Yes, now she was very busy. She was a sought-after psychologist with her own office. Of course, thanks to her father. Antonio came to her new apartment just 2 days after she moved in. Cecilia was very surprised to see the chief doctor at her doorstep, and even more surprised when she saw his eyes. They were red, weary. Of course, Antonio, please come in. He entered and sat on the couch. Cecilia, I came to tell you a story. Honestly, I don't know how you'll take it, but I have to. I want to start by saying that I didn't know anything until I saw you. Many years ago, I was a young and handsome man and I fell in love with a young and beautiful girl. I was young, passionate, and quite good-looking myself. We started dating and I realized I wanted to marry her. We wanted to get married. Laura was an orphan, so we decided to have a small civil ceremony and a modest celebration. But on my bachelor party, I got drunk. I don't even know how it happened. Although that doesn't justify my actions, I ended up spending the night with someone else. Someone told her about it, and we had a terrible argument, and she broke up with me. I didn't try to reconcile. No way, I was too proud. Later, of course, I regretted it, but I couldn't find her. She simply disappeared. No one saw her. At work, they said she had resigned and was planning to leave. 10 years later, I met her old friend. She told me that Laura didn't survive childbirth, meaning she was pregnant when she left me. Neither she nor the child survived. When I saw you, I nearly lost consciousness. You and your mother are like two peas in a pod. I took a DNA test. I'm sorry for not telling you about it, but when it confirmed that you're my daughter, I started digging the information. Laura did give birth, but she didn't survive, and the child, you, were immediately taken away. Laura apparently had a second cousin who, for some reason, didn't have any contact with her, and that cousin's parents didn't want to take Laura from the orphanage. And then, somehow, they found each other, just when your mother needed to give birth. That's the story. Cecilia, I have no idea what will happen now. But I'm begging you not to reject me. I never got married because, as it turns out, I loved Laura more than I thought. I blamed myself all my life, and then I find out that I have a daughter. I would really like to help you. To try to make things right. I'm just very afraid that you'll push me away. Cecilia listened and couldn't believe her ears. Now everything fell into place, the gossip of the village women and her grandmother's words. I suspected this all my life, but I constantly pushed those thoughts away. It turns out, it was for nothing, she said, looking at Antonio, tears streaming from her eyes. Of course, I won't push you away. It's very scary to live when you have no one who's your family, she added. Jamie arrived in the evening, surprised to find Antonio as Cecilia's boss. There was indeed something to be surprised about as Antonio, rolling up his sleeves, attempted to hang a curtain rod. Hello, Antonio. Hey, you're just in time, come on in, you'll help me, Antonio replied. Cecilia looked at Jamie with embarrassment. She realized that something was going on between them, but also understood that it shouldn't be like that. But then things started spinning and progressing. Before going on maternity leave, Cecilia worked at the hospital. Soon, acquaintances of her patients began approaching her for advice. And right before giving birth, Jamie proposed to her. She tried to dissuade him for a long time, explaining that she would soon have a child and that he didn't need a wife like her. But Jamie was adamant. He simply asked, "Just be honest, do you love me?" Cecilia was taken aback. "I do love you, but that doesn't mean." "That's it. Don't say anything else. I love you, you love me, and together we will love our child." When Arturo was born, his grandfather suggested that Cecilia open her own clinic. She might not have dared to do it on her own, but with the strong support of her father and husband, there was simply no chance of failure. Sergio drove to the house, composing a speech the entire way. It didn't come out very well, so he had to stop to think it over again. He even wrote down on a piece of paper what he needed to say. Well, he certainly wouldn't look at the paper, but it would help him remember. The house had transformed significantly. He sat in the car, surprised by the new windows and gates. The only thing that remained from before was the lilac bush by the entrance. It seemed strange, indicating that Cecilia wasn't struggling at all. This complicated matters. He would have to appeal to her love. Cecilia wasn't the type of person to forget him so quickly. He was sure that his ex-wife still suffered and loved him. Sergio approached the gate. It was closed, but there was a doorbell. He pressed the button for a long time, but no one answered. That meant nobody was home. Well, that's all right. He wasn't too proud to wait. Sergio sat on a bench, the kind that was by the gate in every village. He would sit and think things over. "Are you looking for Cecilia?" A neighbor stood in front of him. Yes, it was Clara. Sergio stood up. "Clara, hello. Don't you recognize me?" She squinted her eyes. "It can't be you, Sergio. Is that you?" "It's me." The woman pursed her lips. "What did you come for?" "I wanted to talk to Cecilia. I don't think she'll be happy to see you." Sergio started to get angry. So Cecilia turned him into a monster here. Well, that's for us to decide, whether she's happy or not. Where is she? She'll be here soon. So Cecilia doesn't live here. She hasn't lived here for a long time. She's in the city. Sergio was surprised, wondering what she was doing there. Where in the city, do you know? Where does she rent an apartment? Rent? No, she doesn't rent. She lives in her own house. I've been to her place. It's beautiful and spacious. He almost burst out laughing. Cecilia was very good at deceiving others, just so no one would feel sorry for her. No one worried about her. Well, I see. Can you give me the address of that house? No, I won't. What if Cecilia doesn't want to see you? What are you talking about? Cecilia won't want to see me? Do you actually believe that? I believe it, but it seems like you don't. Clara, I really need to talk to her. Sergio was tired of talking to this elderly woman who, for some reason, thought she knew everything in the world. Well, you can talk with her then. They should be here soon. At that moment, 2 cars appeared on the road. There they are. Sergio even opened his mouth in surprise. The first car was a sturdy black Jeep, and the second one was white, just like the first. Both cars stopped in front of the house, and a little boy jumped out of the second car and ran towards Grandma Clara. Grandma! She lifted him up in her arms. Look at this good boy. And 2 men got out of the first car, one older with a large bouquet of flowers, and the other about Sergio's age. The older man approached Clara, handed her the flowers, and said something. Sergio could make out that the gift was for the celebration. The young man helped a girl out of the car. He couldn't believe it was Cecilia. Sergio would have never recognized her if he met her on the street. She didn't see him and rushed to hug Clara. Clara, I've missed you so much. I'm on vacation, left all the work to Peta, and decided to have a rest for a week. Clara smiled. That's good, and Arturo needs some fresh air too. Cecilia, Sergio is waiting for you over there. Who? Cecilia turned around, and immediately she stopped smiling. She took a step towards her ex-husband. Why did you come here? He didn't expect their meeting to start like this and was even flustered. I wanted to talk. Talk? What do we have to talk about? Go talk to Sandra. Well, she kicked me out. Sergio almost bit his tongue. Why did he say that? So, I left on my own. You realized I made a mistake and left. A mistake? Cecilia laughed. So, after Sandra threw you out, you decided to come to me? No, Cecilia, you've got it wrong. Sergio felt uncomfortable that Cecilia saw through him so quickly. He noticed that the two men approached them, and their expressions were far from friendly. I just thought we had everything so good. We loved each other so much. Maybe we can try again. He already knew he was spouting nonsense. Cecilia had an engagement ring on her finger, and it wasn't just any ring, it was a fancy one. The young man also wore a similar ring. Sergio, I'm astonished by you. What were you thinking when you came here? That I would be sitting here, just like 5 years ago, waiting for you and crying on my suitcases? You left me with nothing, no money, no home. You knew I wasn't working, that I had nothing. And now, you show up as if nothing happened. Arturo approached Cecilia. Mom, who is this man? Sweetie, he's a complete stranger. He just got confused and is leaving now. Cecilia took Arturo's hand, and they disappeared behind the gates. Clara stayed to observe the men. Sergio felt out of place, but he had to do something. He looked at the young man. I understand you adopted my son? I would like to discuss the terms under which he won't find out anything. Maybe he could extract some money from this situation. Before Sergio realized it, a punch struck his cheek, and he found himself on the ground. The man leaned over him. If you ever show up again, I'll bury you. Antonio smirked. And I'll help. Clara smiled. And I'll give you the shovel. I have a good one. Sergio silently got up, dusted off his pants, and headed towards his car. His cheek was burning brightly, indicating a bruise. Well, it didn't matter. He would take care of his injuries later, and then this family would regret crossing paths with him. He accelerated so forcefully that the uprooted grass and soil flew in the air. He would show them all once he reached the city. However, he only ended up at the police station 2 days later, having run out of money and needing to take action. Over those 2 days, he had managed to learn a lot about Cecilia. The family had enough money, so it seemed like a viable option. They escorted him to the police chief's office after reading his statement. He entered the room. Take a seat. I see you want to punish Jamie? Yes, I do. Well, here's the thing. I already know you spent 2 days drinking. It comes with the job, you know. So you could get into a fight with your buddies, you understand that, don't you? And one last thing, if you try to ruin the life of a doctor with golden hands and a brilliant mind, I'll ruin your life. Did you get it? The police chief didn't bother telling this intoxicated man that if it weren't for Cecilia and Jamie, he wouldn't have a child, and perhaps not even an ex-wife. Sergio stepped out onto the street, and now what? He had absolutely no idea what to do. No support, no advice. Hey, man, can you spare some change? Then we can get a bottle. The person looking at him wasn't a homeless person, but someone who had already reached that point. And some snacks? We'll find snacks. I live in a private neighborhood, we can grab something from the garden. Sergio emptied his pockets, giving the man everything he had. The man was pleased. Oh, this should be enough for a couple of bottles. Stay here, I'll be right back. How much in our lives depends on the decisions we make, but Sergio realized too late how much he had erred when he betrayed Cecilia.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.